සියලුම SLT මොබිටෙල් සේවාවන් My SLT ඇප් එක හරහා කරගන්න. සියලුම SLT මොබිටෙල් සේවාවන් My SLT ඇප් එක හරහා කරගන්න.
Let the race begin. As Parliament is officially informed of the vacancy of the President's office, leader of the JGB Anurakumara Dissanayake joins list of contestants for presidential race. Conflict. Disagreements within the SLPP as Professor G.L. Peiris questions party secretary's decision to extend unending support for acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe. A national pass. Sri Lanka introduces fuel rationing system to ease burden on fuel queues.
From today onwards, every individual in Sri Lanka who owns a vehicle can register their vehicles on the website fuelpass.gov.lk, which will be available for you in the next few days to register.
In your interest, China as a very important creditor of Sri Lanka should participate in restructuring Sri Lanka's debt, says US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen.
China is, of course, a very important creditor of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is clearly unable to repay that debt.
All this and much more coming up tonight on First at 9. This Saturday, the 16th of July, 2022.
Nava life boy kohomba swabhavika kohoma saraya samaga hanikara paraban rahitai.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
Good evening and welcome to AdaDerana 24's English News. I'm Andrew Bernard. Now in your top stories for tonight, Sri Lanka's parliament was officially notified today of Gotabaya Rajapaksa's resignation as president by Secretary General of Parliament Dhammika Dassanayake when the House convened for the first time since the 9th of July mass protest. In his letter of resignation, former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa said he believes he took all possible measures to address the crisis and even invited parliamentarians to form an all-party government. The former president went on to say that he remains committed to serve the country just as he did in the past during his tenure as the head of state. Sri Lanka now awaits nominations to the newly vacant president's office to be presented in Parliament next week.
Parliament convened today under the leadership of the Speaker of Parliament, Mahinda Yapa Abewardena, according to provisions of the Presidential Elections Special Provisions Act No. 2 of 1981, following the resignation of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, effective from the 14th of July. Heavy security was provided in and around the two main entry roads to Parliament today. As the parliamentary session commenced at 10 a.m., Secretary General Dhammika Dassanayake officially informed the House that a vacancy has been created in the office of the President.
අතිගරු ජනාධිපති ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ මහතා 2022 ජූලි මාස 14 වන දින සිට බලපැවැත්වෙන පරිදි ඉල්ලා අස්වීම හේතු කොටගෙන ජනාධිපති ධූරයේ පුරප්පාඩුවක් ඇති වී තිබෙන බව මා විසින් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවට මෙසේ දන්වා සිටිනු ලබන අතරම.
Following this announcement, the Secretary General then presented former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa's letter of resignation to the House. In his letter of resignation, former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa has said he had taken all possible steps to resolve the crisis in the country, including by trying to form an all-party government.
COVID-19 වසංගත තත්වයෙන් ජනතාව ආරක්ෂා කර ගැනීමට 2020 සහ 2021 වර්ෂවල වරින් වර රට වසා දැමීමට සිදුවීම හේතුවෙන් වසර ගණනාවක් තිස්සේ වර්ධනය වෙමින් පැවති ආර්ථික අර්බුදය තවදුරටත් වර්ධනය වීම සහ විදේශ විනිමය හිඟයකට මුහුණ දීමට අප රජයට සිදුවිය. ඒ තුලින් ඇති වූ අස්ථාවරත්වයන්ට විසඳුමක් සෙවීම සඳහා පාර්ලිමේන්තුව නියෝජනය කරන සියලු දේශපාලන පක්ෂ නායකයින්ට ආරාධනා කරමින් සර්වපාක්ෂික හෝ ජාතික ආණ්ඩුවක් පිහිටුවීමට මවිසින් හැකි සෑම උත්සාහයක්ම ගන්නා ලද අතර.
Further, the former head of state added that he tendered his resignation after the public requests, and the decision at the party leaders' meeting was brought to his notice through a letter submitted by the Speaker of Parliament.
පොදු ජනතාවගේ ඉල්ලීම 2022 ජූලි මාස 9 වැනි දින ඇති ලිපිය මගින් ඔබතුමා විසින් මා වෙත දැනුම් දුන් පාර්ලිමේන්තුවේ පක්ෂ නායකයින්ගේ ඉල්ලීම අනුව ශ්‍රී ලංකා ප්‍රජාතාන්ත්‍රික සමාජවාදී ජනරජයේ ජනාධිපති ධූරයෙන් 2022 ජූලි මාස 14 වන දින සිට ක්‍රියාත්මක වන පරිදි ඉල්ලා අස්වන බව මෙයින් දැනුම් දෙමි.
However, the former president has emphasized in his letter of resignation his continued commitment towards the country.
තවද මේ දක්වා මා උපන් මව්බිමට මාගේ උපරිම ශක්ති ප්‍රමාණයෙන් සේවය කළ පරිදිම ඉදිරියටත් ඒ සඳහා මාගේ උපරිම දායකත්වය ලබා දීමට අපකැප වී සිටින බවත් වැඩිදුරටත් දන්වා සිටිමි. මෙයට හිතවත් ගෝඨාභය රාජපක්ෂ ශ්‍රී ලංකා ප්‍රජාතාන්ත්‍රික සමාජවාදී ජනරජයේ ජනාධිපති.
In the meantime, explaining the procedure for electing the next president, Secretary General of Parliament said that a member of Parliament who wishes to nominate a fellow member for the election is required to obtain the nominee's prior written consent, indicating that such member is willing to serve if elected and that the MP nominated for candidacy must also be present in Parliament on the day.
එක් මන්ත්‍රීවරයෙකුගේ නම පමණක් යෝජනා වී තිබෙනවා නම් 2022 ජූලි මාස 19 වැනි අඟහරුවාදා යෝජනා කර ස්ථිර කරනු ලැබුවහොත් මා විසින් එසේ යෝජනා කරනු ලැබූ මන්ත්‍රීවරයා පුරප්පාඩු වී තිබෙන ජනාධිපති ධූරය සඳහා පාර්ලිමේන්තුව විසින් තෝරා පත් කර ගනු ලැබූ බව ප්‍රකාශයට පත් කරනවා. කෙසේ වෙතත් එක් මන්ත්‍රීවරයෙකුට වඩා වැඩි දෙනෙකුගේ නම් යෝජනා කර ස්ථිර කරනු ලබයි නම් ඒ අනුව 2022 ජූලි මාස 20 වැනි බදාදා පාර්ලිමේන්තුව රැස්වීමක් පවත්වා ජනාධිපති ධූරය සඳහා ඡන්ද විමසීම සිදු කළ හැකිය.
Following these announcements, Parliament was adjourned until its next session on the 19th of July.
Now currently 4 members of Parliament, that is Acting President and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, Opposition Leader Sajith Premadasa, SLPP MP Dallas Alhaperuma and the leader of the Jatika Janabala Vegya Anura Kumara Dissanayake will contest to fill the now vacant office of the President. In this backdrop, a difference of opinion was reported within the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramana as following the announcement by the party secretary Sagar Karivasam that complete support will be given to the acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe. Chairman of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramana, Professor G.L. Pieris, in a letter today expressed disbelief and questioned the General Secretary of how the party made such a decision. Meanwhile, the Sri Lanka Freedom Party said it will refrain from voting to elect a new president as many candidates are now voting for the post. With the office of the president currently vacant following the resignation of former President Gotabaya Rajapaksa on the 14th of July, 4 members of Parliament have expressed their willingness to run for the position. As such, Parliament is scheduled to convene on the 19th of July, during which the nominations to fill the vacancy created for the office of the President will be presented and taken up. A parliamentary election for the position will be taken on the 20th of July. As it stands, 4 members of Parliament are expected to contest for the vacant position. Acting President and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe, Leader of the Opposition Sajith Premadasa, SLPP MP Dallas Alhaperuma and Leader of the Jatika Janabala Vegya Anura Kumara Dissanayake. Opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, taking to Twitter yesterday, said that he will be contesting for presidency, and even though the Gotabaya Rajapaksa coalition dominates the numbers and it is an uphill struggle, he said he is convinced that the truth will prevail. Meanwhile, during a meeting of the Samagi Janabala Vegya today, all members of the party expressed their support to its leader's decision to contest for presidency. In the meantime, with acting President and Premier Ranil Wickremesinghe tipped to be contesting for the position, Secretary of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramana, the majority party in Parliament, Sagar Karivasam, announced that the party is ready to give their full support to Ranil Wickremesinghe. Meanwhile, former minister and SLPP parliamentarian Dallas Alaperuma said he intends to contest for the presidency when Parliament calls for nominations next week. However, SLPP party secretary Sagar Karyavasam reiterated their support to Ranil Wickremesinghe, saying that MP Dallas Alaperuma has gone against the common agreement of the party by making a public announcement. However, following this, Chairman of the Sri Lanka Podujana Peramuna, Professor G.L. Peiris, issued a letter questioning how the SLPP made a decision to support the candidature of acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe for the office of President. Through the letter, Professor Peiris inquired from the secretary of the party under what authority this purported decision was made and names of the persons who purportedly participated in the making of this decision. Professor Peiris also called for the basis of selection of these persons, the venue, date and time of the meeting, particulars relating to the notice convening the meeting, including the date and time of this notice. He also requested the secretary to provide the provisions of the constitution of the SLPP in terms of which the decision was made. Now, acting President Ranil Wickremesinghe has decided to implement an urgent relief program to provide fuel, gas and essential food items to people struggling due to the economic pressure. He has taken this decision following discussions held with ministers and members of Parliament this morning. In addition, it has been decided to use additional money for this from the relief budget that will be presented in August. During the discussion, the acting president has advised to speed up the implementation of the food security program, and special attention was also paid to provide fuel and fertilizers regularly and promptly. Also during the discussion, plans have been made to facilitate the necessary environment for businessmen to operate without any hindrances. Now, US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says China is a very important creditor of Sri Lanka, and it would likely be in the interest of both countries if China participated in restructuring Sri Lanka's debt. Yellen said she would urge other members of the group of 20 major economies to put pressure on China to be more cooperative in the long-stalled efforts to restructure the efforts of the countries in debt distress during Sri Lanka.
US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, speaking at a news conference about Sri Lanka's debt to China on the sidelines of the G20 meeting of finance officials on the Indonesian island of Bali, said she hoped China, a very important creditor of Sri Lanka, will be willing to work with Sri Lanka to restructure the debt that the island is clearly unable to repay.
China is, of course, a very important creditor of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is clearly unable to repay that debt, and it's my hope that China will be willing to work with Sri Lanka to restructure the debt.
The US Treasury Secretary singled out China for failing to cooperate in efforts to provide debt relief under the common framework adopted by G20 members and the Paris Club of Official Creditors in October 2020 to help heavily indebted low-income countries weather the COVID-19 pandemic.
We're really looking to China to step up their role in debt restructurings that are eligible for treatment under the common framework. We've not seen much progress, and part of what I expect to do over the next several days is urge our partners and in the G20 to put pressure on China to be more cooperative in restructuring these unsustainable debts.
Sri Lanka owes at least $5 billion to China, although some estimates put it at almost twice that amount. India has also lent Sri Lanka $3.8 billion, and Japan is owed at least $3.5 billion, according to the International Monetary Fund, with another $1 billion due to other rich countries. Sri Lanka defaulted on $51 billion of international debt in May this year.
We'll be back with more news after this short break. Stay with us.
Big 3.
Welcome back. Now, the Ministry of Power and Energy today introduced a national fuel pass allowing vehicle owners to secure a guaranteed quota of fuel per week for their personal vehicles. Accordingly, one vehicle can be registered under one national identity card, passport number or business registration number. A QR code will be allocated to each vehicle following the registration and verification of the chassis number of the vehicle registration number, the number plate, and other details by the Motor Traffic Department. This will be the only pass that the government will allow people to purchase fuel not only from the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation's filling stations but also from the Lanka IOC filling stations, as well as the minister stressed.
We thought of introducing this mechanism so that it will give a guaranteed weekly quota for every individual who owns a vehicle. The last few months we have encountered so many obstacles in procuring the fuel requirements and also distribution. From today onwards, every individual in Sri Lanka who owns a vehicle can register their vehicles on the website fuelpass.gov.lk, which will be available for you in the next few days to register. And I'm going to request you not to start registering immediate. You can register yourselves in the next few days. Take some time and do the registration work. You have to enter your ID number. If you don't have a national ID number, you can use your passport number. If you don't have a national ID or a passport, you can use a business registration number that has been allocated to you. With that, you can register up to one vehicle. Only one ID card, one passport number or one business registration will allow you to register one vehicle as your vehicle that you'll be using. And there are different categories that have been given in that, which we have taken from the Department of Motor Traffic. They have 6 categories: motorbikes, cars, 3-wheelers, vans, lorries and buses. Jeeps, SUVs and double cabs fall into the category of cars, just like how it is categorized in the Department of Motor Traffic. And once you do the registration process, you will have to enter your number plate, the registered vehicle number, and also the chassis number. Then that is verified by the Department of Motor Traffic. After it is verified, you will receive a QR code which can be printed or which can be kept as a screenshot on your smartphone. Or if you don't have a smartphone, you can log into a website, get a printout and keep the QR code with you. This will be the only pass that we will allow for people to purchase fuel, not just from CPC, CPETCO fuel stations, but LIOC as well. But we will announce a day that it will commence from. But once the registration is done, it will take us about 3 or 4 days for us to determine what the quota is going to be. So each vehicle category will be given a guaranteed weekly quota. That weekly quota will not carry that for the next week. So it will be a weekly guaranteed quota. And also the number plate, the last digit of the number plate will also come into effect with the fuel pass, both at the same time. So every individual who has a registered number plate ending with 0, 1 or 2 will have Monday and Thursday to purchase fuel from LIOC and CPC. Numbers ending with 3, 4 or 5 will have Tuesday and Friday. Numbers ending with 6, 7, 8 or 9 will have Wednesday, Saturday and Sunday. But both these will come into effect only after the registration is completed and once the ministry announces the date for it to be implemented.
Now, meanwhile, the Energy Minister announced today that a shipment of diesel reached Colombo this morning and sample checking is currently underway. Minister of Power and Energy Kanchana Wijesekara said another vessel carrying a diesel consignment is expected to reach Colombo later today. Meanwhile, Sri Lanka is also expecting a petrol shipment either on the 18th or 19th of July. According to Minister Wijesekara, the payments for all 3 shipments have already been settled. However, the minister said despite arrival of fuel shipments, the distribution of fuel will begin only after the fuel pass system is implemented. Accordingly, members of the public are urged not to wait in queues at Ceylon Petroleum Corporation filling stations. Welcome back. Now in your business news, Sri Lanka's Manufacturing Purchases Managers Index and the Services Managers Index posted declines in the month of June to 44.1 and 40.3 respectively. The decline in manufacturing PMI has been attributed to the lower production capacity due to the inflationary pressure, while lower business activity and employment contribute to decline in the Services PMI for last month. The Manufacturers Managers Index declined in June this year, indicating a setback in manufacturing activities on a month-on-month basis. The PMI recorded an index value of 44.1 last month, with a decline of 6.2 index points from the previous month, driven by the decrease in all sub-indices except suppliers' delivery time. New orders meanwhile declined particularly in the manufacturing of food and beverage sector, partly due to the deterioration of purchasing power amidst the high inflationary environment. Many export-oriented manufacturing firms also witnessed lower than anticipated orders as foreign buyers are worrying over the fragile political and economic condition prevailing in the country and possible disturbances to order fulfillment. The decline in production levels in June this year compared to the month of May was mainly because of the shortage of materials and ongoing energy shortage. Scarcity of fuel affected production directly as well as indirectly through difficulties in transportation. In the meantime, the overall expectations of manufacturing activities for the next 3 months continued to deteriorate compared to the previous month due to the prevailing uncertain economic environment in the country, supply-side constraints, and possible weakening of external demand. Meanwhile, the services PMI dropped further to an index value of 40.3 in June 2022, indicating a contraction in services activities for the third consecutive month. This was due to the declines in new businesses, business activities, employment, and expectations for activity sub-indices. New businesses declined further last month compared to May 2022, particularly with the decreases observed in transportation, accommodation, food and beverage, and education subsectors. Globally, the manufacturing PMI recorded a value of 52.2 in June 2022, with a decrease of 0.1 index points from May. Manufacturing PMIs of China and Russia improved at a higher pace in June 2022, while it increased at a slower rate in Eurozone, USA, UK, Singapore and India compared to the previous month. Meanwhile, the global services PMI posted 53.9 in June 2022, from 51.9 in May this year, indicating an expansion in global services activities. Service PMIs of China, USA, India, UK and Japan indicated that their services sectors expanded in June 2022 compared to the previous month. Now, China's economy contracted sharply in the second quarter of this year as widespread coronavirus lockdowns hit businesses and consumers. GDP fell by 2.6% in the 3 months to the end of June from the previous quarter. The country's once booming property market is in a deep slump, and the outlook for the global economy has weakened sharply in the recent months. Major cities across China, including the major financial and manufacturing center Shanghai, were put into full or partial lockdowns during this period. This comes as the country continues to pursue its zero-COVID policy. On a year-on-year basis, the world's second largest economy expanded by 0.4% in the April to June quarter, missing expectations of 1% growth. Second quarter GDP growth was the worst outcome since the start of the pandemic, as lockdowns, notably in Shanghai, severely impacted activity at the start of this quarter. June data was more positive, with activity picking up after most of the lockdowns were lifted, but the real estimated downturn continued to drag on growth. GDP was worse than expected. However, unemployment fell to 3.5% and retail sales outperformed impressively. Financial markets are likely to concentrate on the retail figures, which appear to show the Chinese consumer in better shape than expected. However, many analysts do not expect a quick economic recovery for China, as the government continues with its strict zero-COVID approach to slowing the spread of the coronavirus. Now, IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva today warned officials from the group of 20 major economies to take urgent action to combat inflation, warning that the exceptionally uncertain global economic outlook could turn worse if much higher prices persisted. Georgieva, speaking at a G20 finance officials meeting in Indonesia, said Russia's intensifying war in Ukraine had increased pressure on commodity and energy prices, and global financial conditions were tightening more than expected. At the same time, pandemic-related disruptions and renewed supply chain bottlenecks continued to weigh on economic activity. She said pressure was mounting on heavily indebted countries and the debt situation was deteriorating fast. Now, Saudi Arabia's foreign minister said during a US-Arab summit held today that it did not discuss oil and that OPEC Plus would continue to assess market conditions and do what is necessary. Prince Faisal bin Farhan Al Saud has told a news conference that there was no oil discussion at the summit, adding that there were discussions with the United States and consumer nations about crude all the time. US officials said President Joe Biden would discuss energy security with leaders of the Gulf oil producers during his visit and hoped to see more action by OPEC Plus to boost output. But there was unlikely to be any bilateral announcements from the talks. The United States is eager to see Saudi Arabia and its OPEC partners pump more oil to help tame crude prices. OPEC Plus, which also includes Russia, meets next on August 3rd. Now that's all from us here at First at 9. Have a pleasant evening. Good night.